try to talk a little bit about my personal journey with this attack, because as I was looking at it, I wasn't really taking it in to start with. Obviously, I'm looking at it from the point of view of whether it's a false flag or not, so it doesn't really quite sink in, except I'm thinking, where do I know Bataclan from? And suddenly when I looked up the address, I realised it was on Boulevard Voltaire, which is where I lived when I was in Paris. After I was arrested in Paris and the French courts freed me because I was political, I spent 2 years beyond the jurisdiction of the British living in Paris, and I lived on Boulevard Voltaire. Now obviously we could take some symbolism from this, because Voltaire is the man who came up with the libertarian creed of, I disagree with what you say, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it. But then I began to look at where the attacks were, and it began to slowly dawn on me that La Cosa Nostra's restaurant I'd been to. We used to eat in restaurants around there.
All right.
The other side of my house, we drank in La Belle Équipe as well, and the Comptoir Voltaire. So I thought, this is a bit weird, all these attacks around where we used to live. I then joined them together, and the crosses right over the flat where I used to live in Paris. Now, if anyone wants to look this up, I've got it on a video. If you put in David Shayler Paris attacks on YouTube, and the map is on there. There's no doubt about this. People can say, this is something random, but that is the simplest way of joining 4 points like that is by doing a cross, and there's no doubt that cross is right over our flat in Paris, basically.
You must have been out there pre-planning.
Well, somebody said, well, that can't be the case, because these ISIL terrorists, there only been about 10 around that time. It's like, what? What's the crazy thing? But it does seem to show something. And what I've got to explain the background to all this is that I've been sending affidavits to various people over the years, but I've just recently done one in which I set out the statement of pure law, written from the point of view of what is law, but how that law is recognised as a higher law in their system. And when I say law, I'm not talking about legislation, judicial rulings. We've been told that's law, but all the research shows it's not. In fact, even in their system, they call people barristers, solicitors. They're never called lawyers, are they? You actually look at the language they're using, basically. And they have legalese. You can look this up for yourself in Black's Law Dictionary. The word must is synonymous with the word may. So when it says you must do something, in legalese, it means you may do something. So lots and lots of this stuff. So I've been using this affidavit. It's a 20-page affidavit of pure law, and shows you why you're not responsible to any of that legislation, to any government or anything else. Your only duty is to your fellow human beings, to protect their rights, basically. And that should be the model for government. Government should be there to protect other people's rights, and that's it, rather than working in the interests of psychopathic corporations. And the affidavit process is a threefold process. So I submit the affidavit on the 27th of October, and then allow 10 days to expire. I then put it in what's called a notice of opportunity to cure, where you tell them they haven't rebutted the affidavit. It'll become set in stone in law unless they do so in the next 3 days. I was then about to put in the final bit, because that 3 days expired at close of play on Friday the 13th of November, basically. And I was about to put in the final notice of default on them, and I just checked my recorded deliveries and realised the affidavit hadn't actually gone out, would you believe? That I'd actually at the time submitted 3 affidavits. The other 2 had successfully got to the police and so on. The one for the Queen, mysteriously, was still at the postal sorting office. And even the opportunity to cure that I'd said afterwards, 10 days later, that had got through to Windsor Castle, but not the original affidavit. So anyway, I redid the affidavit. But the point I make is that it seems very weird that just as their time to rebut this affidavit is expiring at close of play Friday, or midnight Friday, they are carrying out these terrible attacks. And those attacks in the centre of Paris form a cross over my flat. So there's something weird going on here. Now, I do truly believe that we have a way forward that is very, very simple, and it stops all this nonsense of lobbying government. It stops our dependency on government. All it requires is people having the bravery to actually allow themselves to be judged under law. To say this affidavit explains it in great detail what law is and why you have no duty to them. And of course, if you have no duty to their legality, you don't have to pay a mortgage or taxes or rent. Now again, if we want to bring this system down, I've been battling for 18 years, and I will tell you, you get nowhere with reason and good arguments and evidence. You are dealing with a bunch of psychopaths. The only language they will understand is the one that takes money out of their system. So stop paying the mortgage, stop paying tax in that system. Tell everybody about that and tell them this is a no-brainer. If I'm wrong and in 6 months' time somebody says, yeah, you've got to pay your mortgage, have the money in the account that's beyond their reach so you can pay it and you don't lose your house. But the point is, once you stop paying your mortgage, your house is yours, you can live in it. And if we want to be truly free, that's how we've got to be free. We've got to stop putting money in their system. We've got to then source our own energy, basically. We can start to take land under the common law and grow our own hemp. So one of the biggest things that was missed last week, I'm not normally a big fan of George Monbiot, but he'd done the research on the tens of millions of subsidies that are going to very rich people and big corporations to not grow food on land. This must be the most insane thing ever done by any government in history, to pay people not to grow food. Anybody tells you this is a free market economy, it is clearly not. It's controlled by banks and governments. In a free market, big corporations become too unwieldy. They naturally fall apart because competitors that are smaller and more nimble will take their trade off them, basically. But when those big corporations are propped up by government, we have Mussolini's textbook definition of fascism. And that will carry on and on and on. We are now paying £1 billion a week in interest on the national debt. That's interest, not paying off the debt. So for us, we're paying £1 billion a week to the bankers. We are getting absolutely nothing back. So again, I would say to anybody who signed up for that, what an insane idea that. They mess up the economy and you've got to pay for it. No, it's like David Cameron's Big Society. You carry out all the services and you pay your taxes for them. What sort of mad person of very, very low self-esteem is going to do that? So I say all it is really is about standing up to them. What they rely upon is people being craven. They rely on people when they come from a courtroom and wave something called possession order. People think, yeah, I've got to go. It comes from a courtroom. But it's not signed. And if you stand there and say this is not signed and refuse to let them in, there's not a lot they can do. I mean, obviously they can break the law. We've seen this on countless evictions where we've tried to do this. They have broken the law. But again, we've got to have our people in place to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, part of this, again, if we want to stop this, is meeting it man to man. When I say man, I'm talking about women as well, is to see behind the uniform of the army personnel, behind the policemen, and say to them, if you haven't got a signed piece of paper here, you are in breach of the law and I'm going to sue you, basically. You personally. Yeah? So if you haven't got a signed piece of paper here, you don't come on the operation to stand there and do what we're supposed to observe to prevent a breach of the peace. I point out when we have 30 security officers, around 7 of us, have come to our land, they're breaching our peace. We're not breaching theirs, we've just been sitting here in our home, basically. Now, I think this creates massive problems, because having worked on the other side, I know that they've got to work within the rule of law. Now, they may dance through hoops like they do around the Iraq War and so on, but nevertheless, that concept is extremely important to government. So again, you're trying to play with the individual civil servants, tell them they're going to be in breach of the law. Again, we can stop the national debt, it's usury. Usury is against the law. So anybody in the government who authorises the payment of the national debt has per se broken the law. Now, we're not going to wait around for them to enforce this because clearly they're not going to do it. But this is the law, and we can, in these circumstances, in obvious cases where the law has been broken, I think we have to take the law into our own hands, because the law is a people's thing.
Can you explain that point in a bit of detail? Why is usury against the law?
Because, to tell you where the law comes from, it comes from the Bible. It's not law because it's from the Bible, it's law because it stands to reason. But this is actually in all our constitutional documents. Through the oath, Magna Carta mentions God, then it mentions the clause about no free man should be taken without due process and trial by jury. Now, my research shows that law, given to us by Jesus Christ in the New Testament, contains 2 commandments. Love God and love your neighbour as you love yourself. Now, you notice the second of those commandments, love your neighbour as you love yourself, doesn't even mention God. It's an atheist commandment given to us by God. And it is the credo of any normal, compassionate human being. You don't need 10 commandments. I don't murder somebody because I don't want to be murdered. I don't steal off somebody because I don't want to be stolen off. It's that simple, really. Now, that would be great. We'd have a great moral argument if that was just the case. But we don't. I've shown all the documentation where this is shown to be the higher law within their system. And one of the ways Christ teaches law in the Bible, he says, have you not read in the scriptures? And he quotes the Bible. And then he says, is it not written in your law? If it's in the scriptures and it's in your law, what can they argue? Look, mate, it says this is a higher law in your system. Where are you going to go? And the only way they can go from there is breaking the law. But every person who has an office in this country has sworn the oath. The oath is sworn before God. You're on God's law of love your neighbour as you love yourself. And to protest against God's law of love your neighbour as you love yourself, you're giving yourself away as a psychopath. Because only a psychopath has the kind of brain that hasn't developed to have that level of compassion. They can learn right and wrong. We know that serial killer psychopaths will cover up their actions because they don't want to be caught. So they know what they're doing is wrong. What they don't have in their brains is this area developed that stops us thinking, hang on, I don't want to do that because I don't want it done to me. But this is why this becomes the acid test in law. If you can't understand that law, you're a psychopath and therefore you're not fit to hold public office. Now I suggest we're much better going forward with this than we are with anything else. And what we do with it as well is we use it to swear under oath stuff about 9/11 and all the other stuff to do with vaccinations, to do with the Holocaust. We swear it under oath and serve it on them to try and get them to rebut it. They don't. It becomes set in stone in law. And I think this is what happened with the Holocaust. Is several years ago, somebody swore under oath somewhere that the Holocaust happened, and that's why they put it into law in certain countries. But obviously nobody could be a witness to 6 million people being rounded up. It's not one person's, you cannot make that witness statement. So that affidavit would be faulty in law, basically. You only swear to what you know from your own senses in law. You can't swear to hearsay truth, basically. So I say I've done all this process, and I think it's the only way forward. If people want to talk to me about it, they contact me online, stuff like that. I've started to do a website.
Will we be in the gallery, the pub down the road?
Oh yeah, I'll come to the pub.
Okay, thanks, Darren. Yeah.
Book of the Law has got the affidavit on. bookofthelaw.org. And if you go to downloads, it's got the whole thing there, and it's got the affidavit to
Is
download.
it time for a tea break now?
Okay, I think it's a bit beyond the break. We've got to be out in this time, so we've got to clear up. But thank you very much.
Thank you.